بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Ummah Times Podcast show where we help decolonize minds. And today the topic of discussion is issues plaguing the Ummah. And today we have our esteemed guest, Brother Khalid, who is our resident Khatib. We also have Brother Ali, who is the co-host with me of the Ummah Times Podcast show. And you have myself, Zishan. And Brother Khalid, Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And, recently, a few weeks ago, you did a really, very interesting khutbah that many khatibs, many imams of our masjids don't really, tackle. And that is individualism, right? And your khutbah was it was called Who Cares, right? And we use this attitude in kind of looking at things and judging things. And I want to start off this show with what you talked about in your khutbah. If you can kind of share your insight on that.
Yeah, so the khutbah was about who cares, and it sounds as it is, which is who cares. It's a attitude. I've seen, and actually the reason for that khutbah was I've been doing the khutbahs for 2 to 3 years, and at the end of it, all these big topics I speak about and address throughout the years, I get an overwhelmingly sense from the crowd of who cares. So that is really, and this can be anything from, issues on, like plaguing the ummah, such as, the wars that are taking place in Muslim lands, such as major issues or even issues more locally. Of course, alhamdulillah, I do have few people come up and they find, that one topic you addressed, is interesting and they want to do something about it. But in general, it's just this attitude of who cares. And I'm not blaming, the Muslim community here, at all, but it's just that I found in general, it's a overall sentiment that, as long as it doesn't affect me, as long as it doesn't affect my family, as long as it doesn't affect, I don't know about the street, but, as long as it doesn't affect me and my family.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Why should I care? So therefore, and it's really was questioning that idea of who cares, like, what, and this idea, from the perspective of our deen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's very interesting because I've noticed that it's basically whatever I like whatever I desire. That's kind of like the prism many people use with the way they look at things, the way they look at any ideology. It's like, is it good for me? If it's not, then I'm going to leave it, right? And that's the attitude I have noticed that has also infected many Muslims as well. So, for example, we can take something very basic, just our 5-time prayers that we do as Muslims. So I can do it at home. I'll feel like it in my privacy of my home. I'll do it. But if I'm out and about, that might seem an inconvenience, so I'll just let it go. I mean, that's the one very basic thing we can kind of look at as well. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where the question of who cares comes in. And actually, alhamdulillah, I think, the salah, there's so many things inside our religion and our deen, that actually makes us avoid thinking who cares. And actually, when we look at the core of the idea of who cares, it really boils down to, an idea called individualism. And individualism, we could go into the technical definitions. That's something people can do. But in general, it's really about living in this bubble where I live in my own bubble and, basically, you live in your own bubble. And as long as your bubble's not crossing over my bubble, then we're good. We're okay. But actually, as you mentioned the salah, we know that, sometimes you're praying by yourself, someone will tap you on your shoulder and want to join your salah, which is your individual bubble salah. But Islam says if someone's tapping on your shoulder and he wants to join your salah, then, now it becomes a congregational prayer. So we can see easily like this, if you want Islam and you want it, and you still want your own bubble, it doesn't work. And really, I think the interesting thing you mentioned in salah is, in the middle of the surah, we read that, Allah's the master of the day of judgment. And then we say, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. And the interesting thing from my studies in Arabic, is, there's obviously the plural, and then there's this individual pronoun. But when we say Iyaka na'bud, you alone we worship. Iyaka na'bud. We don't say Iyaka a'bud. You alone I worship.
Exactly.
We actually say you alone we worship, and you alone we seek help from. And the scholars, they say is that number one, this shows number one, you alone, you're not worthy enough to stand in front of Allah. Rather, you need a group of people. You need the whole ummah. That's some of the opinions of the ulama. They say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so great and magnificent. You need the we to stand in front of Allah. That's one of the opinions of the ulama. But in terms of just the general idea is that when you're worshiping Allah, it's not an individual thing. Rather, Allah is saying to say in Surah Al-Fatiha, we worship you. We worship you as a group, and we seek your help as a group. So this really questions the basis of individualism and how it can and it absolutely doesn't fit in Islam.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair for sharing that. And if Brother Khalid can also kind of elaborate on, because this is all connected to the advent of when the whole world was kind of cantonized in these mini nation states, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like you could say these national states, what they represent is kind of a form of individualism, with only concerned with those people within those confined, artificial states that have been created, which is connected to, when the alternative that was there and that had been there for so long, we didn't have this conception of nation states, which was the Usmani Khilafah, was whatever was left of the Islamic system, was kind of destroyed in the 1920s. If you want to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the thing is, the idea of the nation state, it actually, if we look back into it, one of the founders of the ideas, we look at the founding fathers of the United States. Actually, most of the scholars, they say, like the historian scholars, they say most of these ideas were taken from John Locke. Mm. And John Locke was a philosopher in Britain. And basically, one of the ideas, for even the basis of the nation state, in his view, the purpose of the government is ultimately just to protect the liberty of the individual. So in his view, individualism, or protecting a person's individual right to express himself, to own property for his own pursuit of happiness. Actually, you read that in the U.S. Constitution, but that's actually John Locke's fun idea. And basically, the nation state actually, in theory, was just there to protect the individual right for pursuing his happiness, his property. And actually the state in and of itself is just a necessity in the view of John Locke, where the state shouldn't exist in general, but it does exist because, for example, what if my individual right to want to own, let's say, your shirt or your car, like, what if I want to own that? Well, then you're going to say your individual right wants to keep it, or, so then therefore we need a government to make sure my individualism and your individualism can exist together in one reality. Obviously this, we can see on this idea, there's an underlying, fact that's given, which is we are not living as individuals. We share a common plane. So therefore these nation states ultimately, from the philosophical foundations, again, it is based on individualism. However, as we can see is that, the main problem is with these nation states, is the idea of, they never really analyzed and found the meaning of society. Mm-hmm. They never really understood what this society mean. So, we find, for example, the United States, you have, some individuals who are, rich in the billions, right? Like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. But let's mention Jeff Bezos. Bill Gates does some philanthropy here and there. So, but Jeff Bezos, I think he had a tweet saying, I don't understand philanthropy, or I don't understand like the idea of giving back in the first place. Like this idea, he doesn't see any value in it. And you can see, especially this disparity of wealth gap. And, something obviously you see in the election campaign for the Democrats, they're talking about these issues, the social issues. And actually Bernie Sanders, who is very, non-individualistic type platform, it's gaining traction because people do realize this cutthroat individualism, it leads to this idea where, basically a person can be dying in the street. And the reason is, well, he individually failed in life. So therefore deserves to die, survival of the fittest. So we can see these ideas and how it manifests eventually to the nation state.
So how would you kind of contrast that, with the Islamic model and how Islam views the society and how we should cohesively, work on it, building a functional society that's congruent with the Islamic values and Sharia? And do we have like a concept of state? Because it's kind of like, a heated topic nowadays too, especially, in Canada when we just had recent elections, 4 months ago now, right? So, when we were trying to, kind of put some sense into the Muslim brothers and sisters, likely that, Islam views the society differently. We should, if we want to bring in change, we should go about it, bringing in the change, differently, follow the prophetic method. So can you just give us some guideline in terms of that?
Yeah, and actually there's a hadith about Nu'man ibn Bashir where he said, the Prophet said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم مثل القائم على حدود الله والواقع فيه كمثل قوم استحموا على السفينة فصار بعضهم أعلاها وبعضهم أسفلها. So the Prophet, he said, the example of when people, or for one who abides by the rules and laws of Allah and one who falls into the sins, is the example of a people who share in a ship. So part of them take the upper deck and the part of them take the lower deck. And then he said, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he said, فَكَانَ الَّذِينَ فِي أَسْفَلِهَا إِذَا اسْتَقَوْا مَرُّوا عَلَى مَنْ فَوْقَهُمْ. So then the ones downstairs, they said when they had to get water, they'd go upstairs and then they'd get their water because they can't access it from the lower deck. Then they said, and it's the individualism concept. They said, how about, we make a hole in our section of our ship, right? And what I'm doing, man fawqana, and we do not bother those above us. You have this idea, why are you bothering me? So this idea, like, let's not bother those other people, even though, let's just mind our business. We own the downstairs, so let's just make a hole in our section. And the Prophet ﷺ said something very interesting where he said, وَإِن تَرَكُوهُمْ وَمَا أَرَادُوا هَلَكُوا جَمِيعًا. If the people upstairs was to leave the people downstairs, they would destroy everybody. Of course, make a hole in a ship, right? Everybody gonna drown. And then he said, وَإِنْ أَخَذُوهُمْ عَلَى أَيْدِهِمْ نَجَوْا وَنَجَوْا جَمِيعًا. And if they grab them by their hands and stop them, then they all will be saved. So this actually gives a very interesting view of society in Islam. This hadith, subhanAllah, actually gives an idea that, for sure, you live in a ship, you can, we've been camping at Algonquin Park, and the guy in the front, he's moving too much. You can feel the whole canoe moving.
Exactly.
Stop there, buddy. I did mention the khutbah, the current example. You see the coronavirus in that one ship on the coast of Japan. They don't want to let anyone off because they know this way. Everybody wants to get off that ship. So, actually, subhanAllah, Prophet ﷺ using the ship as an example. Number one, we can see it. Every people use ships. So it's not like a boat or a ship. So people are aware of this concept of how delicate the balance is on a boat, on a ship. And like that, the Prophet ﷺ compared society. And the society in Islam's views like that, where people share a common space, and then this is one of the very interesting, correct definition of society, where society is not just the summation of individuals living in a bubble, right? Because, like living in a bubble, not affecting each other. Actually, Islam's view of society is that people have a shared ground. And there's some shared things such as common ideas, common emotions, and common system that they go back to to get rules and laws for. So, this is a definition. Islam is a very specific definition of society that's very different, contrasting from Western philosophy. So, in terms of the question, definitely these are the philosophical, when I say that in a more general way, underpinnings of the Islamic view of a society, and of course, the state. And we do see the Islamic Khilafah, which the Prophet ﷺ, after his passing, and Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu and the rest of the Khulafa who took control, there's this correct understanding of how society is. And I know sometimes we say these things, but, it's almost like the grandeur or like the great past we have. But of course, like Umar radhiyallahu anhu, we know the famous saying where he basically was afraid that if there's a road he didn't fix and animals were harmed in it, he'd be responsible for it. So, it gives this idea of, the ruler being responsible. But it's not because Umar is great or anything just like that. He is great. But because Islam, it shows that he as an individual, has a responsibility of the Ummah. And the Ummah also has a responsibility towards him. So there's this shared common responsibility. That actually fits in Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. We worship you, Allah, and we seek your help. So it's a group effort, not an individual.
Jazakallah khair for that. And I guess, like in regards to what Brother Ali had mentioned, is that, again, like it's an individualism is an extension of like having, loyalty to whatever national territory you're in and the way the system is set up, right? Yes. I believe what Brother Ali was saying is that the attitude of many Muslims is, I think they don't even have a holistic understanding of Islam. And it's connected to who cares. It's me. So let's see what this institution will do for me. So I better get with the game and get myself involved and see, I have the ability to elect someone who will do it and help me do me better. You know what I mean? So instead of looking at, taking a step back and looking at the world as it is and see, what is as a Muslim, what do I represent? Does it, is it something better than this artificially carved territory I'm in and, what they're telling me every 4 years to do? I think we have to do some major self-reflection as to basically it's actually connected to, because I personally also my focus is on dawah, and I actually talk to a lot of non-Muslims, but it's the same kind of conversations we have to have with our fellow Muslims as well, because I feel that if you really sit down with them, it looks like they're not even many of them are not even sure what their purpose of life is. It seems as if it's almost like you're part of a tribe. Okay, you're Muslim. I got these rituals, and that's it. Like, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think this is these conversations, which are having non-Muslims, as well as we all need to have. Is basically is short-sightedness. One of the things is that as a Muslim, we should have the long view of things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Qur'an to even think about the day of judgment, which is, whenever it does occur. So we should always have a long view of things. We can't, one of the main problems is that, a lot of times we find ourselves as a Muslim community acting based on fear, fight or flight. And this is how you're driving a car, you see a deer, and it sees you coming at 120 kilometers, and it'll stop. It doesn't know what to do. And unfortunately, this is the type of environment we do find, especially, we saw in the UK, the mu'adhin, he got stabbed, in one of the most prominent mosques in the UK. So there's this fear created. As well as there's these carrots, if you get involved in this thing, or we get you involved, get your stamp of approval, then therefore you'll be protected, and it's acting based on fight or flight, that basically puts us as Muslims in a way we're behaving not on our own accord, not based on our own views and our own I don't like to use the word destiny, but things Allah has given us as tasks, but rather we're just quickly reacting to what's around us. And again, this does show that individualism is not really true, because we see the power, especially with social media, the ability to garner opinions and public opinion. It's very clear just in terms of society that definitely there needs to be a sort of what's it called? I don't want to use the word administrator, but definitely some oversight on people's general opinions, because opinions do affect other people. We can see that with bullying campaigns, things like that. We know that it's a fact. So, Muslims should really, stop reacting, right? Don't react, but rather sit down, really review, the ideas and really think about, for example, if you're really pushed, towards some sort of an action, before you do that, you should take a step back and ask yourself, what's the long view of this thing?
I think because you bring out quite a few good points there. We were talking about individualism, and you just mentioned as well that how a lot of Muslims, especially right now, we're just talking about the Western context, and in particular just the Canadian context, where they're kind of lost. They don't really have a set goal in life as a Muslim, and what they should be doing to achieve that. There's no objective in their lives. But don't you feel especially living in the Western context, Muslims, even the Maulanas here and all the sheikhs here, shuyukh, the imams of all the masajid here, they also have been bit by this very isms, right? Because they are also working in a very individualistic way. We have numerous Muslim organizations trying to do some good for the Muslims and the non-Muslims alike, in Canada and overseas as well. But at the same time, there's no correlation, there's no collectivity that can be even sensed. It's miles away. It's very individualistic. Don't you think it's about, high time for them to also come together on a table? I hate to use this example, but, we always have 2 to 3 different eats, right? And it's just, that's just a basic example. Yeah. Right? Which is not obviously good just for the Muslim itself, especially the youth who's already suffering with so much, onslaught of the isms. This just adds on to the injury. Right? Yeah.
No, absolutely. And this is where, the imams, shuyukh, we always need to get back to the basics. We have as Muslims relationship, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, that includes worship, ibadah, salah, zakat, salah, hajj, things like that. And then we have things related to ourselves, such as, maintaining good adab, cutting the nails, doing the things Islam tells us for ourselves. And it also has a relationship with the mu'amalat, with others around us. And Islam also has a large section on that. And, if you look at all the 4 madhabs, Hanafi madhab, Shafi'i madhab, Hanbali madhab, and Maliki madhab, and the interesting thing is, all their books of fiqh, the first 5 or 6 chapters will be on individual things, such as wudu, such as, tahara wudu, salah, zakat, zakat, you can say it's not fully individual, but, zakat, hajj, things like that. That's the first few chapters. Now, if we're going to limit ourselves to that only, then of course we're going to have a very individualized Islam.
Or compartmentalized. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I remember a famous speaker, he said, well, Islam and its legal system, the Khilafah system, it just has a few pages in the books of fiqh. Most of the books of fiqh is about wudu. So, this shows how much importance is wudu over, having a Khilafah or things like that. He's using this as a basis, right? But in any case, what we would say to these imams, of course, these are integral parts of the religion, which is these books, the first few sections. But then after that, you have, for example, transactions. Yeah. Right? Transactions, how to buy and sell, sharikat, what kinds of companies you can have in Islam. One of the mistakes is, I see all these, wealth simple, get the halal loan, halal, shares in these in these stocks, XYZ, right? But then they never question, what does Islam say on what are the right types of companies you can have in the first place. Then there's the book of judgment. The husband and wife has a problem. What should be that case? There's then the book of punishments. Islam has a legal system. And what should happen to people who commit crimes. And it has a book on ruling, on what the ruler should do, when should the Muslims obey them. So, the question is to these ulama, these books of fiqh, there's so many sections, these sections, which are not, implementable, because, of course, these are implemented by a state, which are implemented by the Khalifa. What is our role, or what is our duty, to these sections of the book? Do we just forget about it? That's a big question. And really, like, the real challenge is that, basically, as khatibs, as people who are, in the public sphere, we need to, they're the ones who studied the deen. Mm-hmm. They studied the Sharia, they studied in the Islamic universities, right? So they should be the ones in charge of determining what we speak about in these masajid, right? Not the other way around, where they're told, by, a board that may be comprised of lawyers and, dentists and XYZ, and they're telling the imam what he should be talking about. This is one of the common issues where, he's the one who studied. Yeah. He's the one who has, gathered his knowledge. He's the one who's supposed to lead. But unfortunately, the way, the setup is that, there'll be a lawyer, a dentist, may Allah bless them for their, achievements. But are they in charge of giving the directives to the imam? Unfortunately, this is what we see happening, where it's this way, and he has to take these instructions on what he should talk about, what he shouldn't talk about. So, alhamdulillah, there are some imams who, have, raised their voices and are addressing things. But that's where our duty as a community has to come, is we should support the imams and, the shuyukh who are taking position, talking about these issues which matter, and make it clear that, the boards and, they're necessary to have, but, it shouldn't be these shouldn't be employees where they're just given, like a order at McDonald's to go make some fries. These are not our imams. The imams are supposed to be imam and nas, in front of the people, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the thing.
Just I'll care for that. Just kind of like talk more about this matter. So as you know, like, there was an election a couple months ago, a few months ago, right? So, and you said it really right, because people who know better, they're doing publicly what is opposite to what it goes against, like, kind of their ideals. Mm-hmm. If you look at it, so we know, as Muslims, all sovereignty lies with the Creator, right? So why in the world would you advocate? Now, you might privately say, okay, it's okay. I'm going to kind of vote for someone who will enact laws that go contrary to the Creator's laws, right? But advocating for it, going out and having selfies with people who are publicly advocating, it boggles the mind, really. It does boggle the mind. This is something that, I don't know if you want to comment further on this, but it does really boggle the mind.
Yeah, and again, I go back to the fight or flight. This is the way, I guess if you work.
Oh, sorry, if I can interrupt you. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to. I also wanted to mention is that, the thing is, like, we have freedom with the current paradigm we're in. So I'll just give you an example. So Jehovah's Witness, they have, in their belief, they don't, get involved with national elections. Yeah. Legally, they have the right to do so.
Yeah.
So and it's for Muslims, according to the revelation, from Allah, it's more clear, compared to them, as to what is right and wrong, right? As to what is right and wrong in this regard. When you realize it, I'm not saying that the nominal Muslim is aware of it, right? That person can't be excused, but someone who is knowledgeable in the deen, as you said, and knows it's so clear cut, and then publicly advocating, even though in the current paradigm they can remain, and in terms of, like, even based on the man-made legal rules, you can do it freely of not participating and advocating in getting people to vote in a national secular election.
But Zishan,
So anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, before I let you continue,
Yeah.
I'll let you know we have to be pragmatic, and there's a thing called minority fiqh that we have to abide by.
Explain to me minority fiqh. But anyways, we can let it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I had the opportunity to attend a session. It's called "Get Out and Vote" campaign for imams. So this was a campaign. It was done, since I was doing khutbahs. I was.
I wish I had popcorns.
So and really, what it is, we know Allah Subhanahu wa Taala tells us to stand for justice. Kunu shuhada. The ummah is shuhada ala nas. They're witnesses among mankind. Allah says to let their eyes of a group enjoying the good forbid the evil. Unfortunately, what it is, these texts were used to say, Allah says to enjoy good forbid the evil, so we need to go vote for this party, or go do this for this party, support this thing. Really, I think, these texts, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a text, do we just take the general meanings and, sort of think in your mind what this should apply to and just sort of go ahead and apply things? What we know is that Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He reveals things mufassala, in a clear-cut way. So when we're giving rules by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands, He also gives us the tariqah on how to implement these rules and laws. We cannot just take the rule and then, Allah says, وَقِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ, pray the salah, and then, you pray as you wish. Rather, Allah Rasul said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, pray as you've seen me pray. When you say enjoying the good forbid the evil, Allah says for you to do that. You cannot just say, okay, this means that I'm going to go tell Muslims to vote for this party or that party. You actually have to see what the Prophet ﷺ, how did he engage in society? Just as a salah, you see how he engaged in salah. When you're commanded to engage in enjoying the good forbid the evil, you have to see how the Prophet ﷺ did that as well. You cannot just say, I'm going to go do this. And really, I think the main issue is again, as you said, the man-made legislation. It ultimately is a philosophy based on ideas like John Locke, who basically, they believed in a God, but they believed God had no role in giving human beings any guidance. So John Locke, a person who, may have acknowledged God's existence, but he believed God gave man the right to make legislation. This is the belief. If you read man has the natural rights endowed by God to make rules and laws. As we as Muslims, we say that's not correct. Allah has created us and given us guidance as well. So this is a fundamental view, fundamental difference in our view. So being told to go out and vote and all these types of things, and this is one of the issues out of many issues. Basically, again, I think we really need to ask the question, did Islam just give us rules and not give us a way to implement these rules? This is the question.
Yeah. It's quite interesting too, because I know the Canadian elections, they just happened 4 months ago, so that's in the past now, but the American 2020 elections are coming up, and we have a lot of viewers in states as well. So, these discussions are still relevant. It's almost like, when election time comes, there's a lot of heated debates.
Yeah.
I was watching some podcasts in UK as well, Blood Brothers. They're doing amazing work there as well. But these topics or these discussions, they just come up around that time, right? And then they just kind of die out.
Yeah.
And comes next time, they come back up again. They rear their ugly head. And, everybody tells, all the Muslims to go out and vote, because otherwise you're going to be, put into, some camps where you're going to be treated, horribly. It's like a life or death matter. But these discussions, these imams you just mentioned right now, they went to these schools, these madrasas and they went to Al-Azhar and all these, top-notch universities in the Islamic world. Don't you know that they should know better, and they are supposed to be the imams, the one leading not just the prayer 5 times a day, but also the community itself. And especially when the community is, oceans away from its land.
Yeah. So, interestingly enough, when the British, they came to Egypt, the first thing they did was to handpick who's going to be the Grand Mufti or Sheikh al-Azhar. So they knew the colonizers, let's go the decolonizing the minds.
Yeah.
But we'll go back.
Exactly.
They realized, the Muslim Ummah, they listen to their imams and shuyukh.
Yeah.
So, when they colonized Egypt, the one thing they made sure to do is to select who's going to be in charge of the religious studies. And unfortunately, this hasn't strayed too much. I mean, when we look at, even recently in Egypt, they had a conference, and it's chaired by who else? By President Sisi. A murderer, a torturer, an oppressor. He's sitting there. And, unfortunately, these universities, which are supposed to, of course, teach these things. And alhamdulillah, there's many great scholars within these universities still teaching. But the overall political direction is given by, the rulers in the Muslim lands, as well as the West. And, there's Mike Pompeo from the United States. He basically said we need to change the curriculum, in Saudi Arabia, in these places. Yeah, exactly. So, in terms of know better, I think these are the discussions we must have, and with everybody, and basically really have this questioning. Like we need to ask these questions, and and then they have to listen. Like there's one of the things is again with individualism. One of the key things we noticed is that. In individualism, if you don't want to listen, then okay, bye. Chat closed, right? Yeah. And this is not acceptable. If someone is telling you something you may not like, you cannot just close the chat. This is one of the key issues where, you may have been doing street dawah as well. Like, people do feel that, if I don't want to hear it, then, I don't have to hear it. And you shouldn't even tell me. Actually, it's considered offensive, to tell somebody something they don't like to hear. This is considered offensive. Then, all the prophets would be very offensive if they were living here. So sometimes we need to break that barrier, and we have to actually break this. And that's why the khutbah comes in that context where we cannot have that attitude where it's just me and me, myself, and I. What I think is good, and I myself and I. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. This is basically the philosophy that was kind of introduced, right, with the breaking of the Usmani Khilafah back in the 1920s. And if I just want to quote, I can quote Prime Minister, so the late Prime Minister William Gladstone. He's the Prime Minister in 1894 when the Usmani Khilafah was on its last leg, and he said that the situation in the East will not be successful until we remove the hijab from the woman and use it to cover the Qur'an. And this kind of leads into the next kind of segment of the whole breakdown of public modesty, which is connected to individualism, right? Because all these colonialists basically told the Muslim woman, hey, you don't have to wear that, you don't have to be covered up, right? And that is really, it's more or less been successful in our societies. I mean, it's one thing where one acknowledges that they're struggling in keeping up with the commandments of the Creator. That's one thing. But justifying, it's not necessary, for example, to conform to parts of the hijab. Hijab is just coined for to have modest attitude and modest attire as per the rules of the Creator. So there are some people, many, who justify saying, it's not necessary. And you've probably come across people like that as well. If you want to comment on that.
Actually brings me back to my university days. I was at Wilfrid Laurier. And alhamdulillah, I was MSA president. And at that time, they had a very active Islamic studies department. And I was always, I was like, mashallah, Islamic studies is great. Unfortunately, the reading, especially with women's issues, there's actually a paradigm, a feminist reading of things. And really it's just to, I remember one of the things was like, the people who explain the Qur'an, the mufassirun, they had a show, basically, a male dominant reading of the Qur'an. So therefore we need a feminine reading of the Qur'an. So as if these ulama, they were basically their chauvinism, a'udhu billah, basically made them make these opinions from themselves. And really, this is an argument that ultimately relies on people's ignorance. As an ummah, alhamdulillah, one of the key things is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected this book and also protected language that basically explains this book. And a lot of times, we find that one of the things is that these opinions of we need another rereading. It comes from people who will not, unfortunately.
Or actually, the word khimar does not mean head cover. It just means cover.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean a headscarf, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what it is there's going to be a rereading of this text without any influence from male dominant views and things like that, which is actually a very offensive thing, because actually one of the greatest scholars of hadith was the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Aisha, which is the third most person who narrated a hadith. And there's been many great women scholars in Islamic history. So they didn't have a feminist reading or things like that. So I think that again, we find this. It's actually these caricatures, for an abusive man who's forcing his wife and doing this and that. Actually, one thing they find difficult to deal with is a strong Muslim woman who wears the hijab, is proud of her identity, and she won't get much time on the news network, to show that she's proud of her Islam. There's so many of those sisters. Actually, majority of events are attended by Muslim sisters who are very strong and powerful in their deen. But they won't entertain them. They won't entertain them on the TV shows, things like that. Rather, they'll bring, one or two cases, this woman, she was abused, XYZ. And basically these are some of these caricatures. And unfortunately, usage of caricatures to, make people to agree to things on an emotional basis, not on an intellectual basis. This is one of the key issues. So we need to definitely let, the Muslim women, the sisters know, that they have as much right to look into the Book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet and read it, understand it, but we cannot have these rereadings, the feminist reading of the Qur'an. These are things which have no philosophical basis and fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, and feminism is it's an extension of individualism, right? And also, as I mentioned, the Prime Minister was talking about Gladstone from 1894. Actually, whole idea of it's called Gladstonian liberalism emerged, right? It's actually called Gladstonian liberalism when they were colonizing and kind of secularizing the Muslim world. So, Ali, you want to make any comments on this?
No, I think you pretty much covered all the points there as well, and then because they are relying on our ignorance, right, to actually make those statements, and unfortunately, we go out and buy them. Right, so that's an unfortunate situation to be in. But how do you? Coming back to the situation we are in right now, right? We can talk about the past till the camels come home. But okay, how do we go about from here now? Right, like what Muslims need to do in living in the West, and I'm trying to keep this very domestic and local,
yes.
Right? And maybe we can have another podcast where we discuss the global issues, but maybe we'll delve into that today as well. I'm not sure, but so what do we do in this situation when we can't look up to the imams? Fine, they should be doing a much better job. A layman, Muslim, does not know him or she any better, anyways. So what can we do?
Yeah, so I think in terms of we basically have to look at our capabilities as Muslim. We have a great history. We have a lot of knowledge. We have lots of we have a lot of great things, and we can study these things and learn these things. But ultimately, we need to be fa'al. We need to have actions. We need to make sure we're active, and we need to really open up forums for discussions. Unfortunately, as I said, individualism, one of the greatest things it has done is given people the ability to not engage with ideas they need to engage with. They believe that it's a right that if the truth, I don't have to hear it. So that what it is if this exists in our community where, people do not want the khutbah addressing issues for society. They want an individual khutbah. How do you personally get close to Allah? Which is important. But, it's not all of the deen. How do you purify your heart? And, these are the type of topics, which we hear about, which is important. But again, you see this individualistic reading of Islam is not acceptable. There's of course, as an individual, you yourself, and there's also a group. So one of the things is we need to make sure that as a Muslim individual, that when we need to reevaluate our view. Number one, is to put individualism on a twist, which is, a very interesting idea, which is, and I alluded in the khutbah that, you should be caring about yourself as an individual, right? Because on the day of judgment, you'll be saying, nafsi, nafsi, myself, myself. But the way you demonstrate that your care about yourself in this life is to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to do. Mm-hmm. So in the view of the public, you might be helping many people, concerned about the ummah, doing things for others. But your view is that this will save me as an individual on the day of judgment. So, the Muslim will have a different view of individualism, which is I individually care about my deeds so much. And I individually care myself, save myself from the hellfire. I'm going to make sure I do all the actions. That basically, for the person who doesn't believe in akhirah, will look at him and say, hey, this guy, he cares for others so much. He doesn't care for himself. So it's to twist this, put this idea upside down. I think this is really the starting point we need to do as Muslims in this community.
Mm-hmm. But when we are Muslims, looking up, again, it comes back to, because right now I'm just talking the American context right now, right?
Yeah.
So when you have imams who are actually partaking in these secular politics and sharing the podiums and the platforms, with, for example, Sanders, right? Who's essentially, just like in Canada, he wants to open up pot shops, everywhere, especially the African American communities, which are actually affected by the drugs. He wants to give them the opportunity to actually give them licenses to open up these pot shops so they can, help themselves financially and economically, right?
Yeah.
So, and these imams we're talking here, right? these are obviously, quote unquote, celebrity sheikhs. Right. So, but when we go and talk to, our neighbors or our fellow Muslims, in schools or at work, places, they tell us, well, that sheikh or those shuyukh, they're telling us something completely opposite to what you're telling us, right?
That's right.
And then how do you, what credential do you have? They actually tell you on your face. Like, who are you to tell me, this about Islam when, so many shuyukh and imams are telling me something completely opposite? So how do you, it's a dilemma we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it definitely is. But you have to also understand that people who give you that answer, I thought so-and-so sheikh said that, it's okay, right? Mm-hmm. You have desires at play. You have personal desires at play. Mm-hmm. Because it fits your desires, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, anything that fits your desires, you're going to try to find justification for that. Mm-hmm. But anyways, in its connection to individualism, if you just look at individualism itself as an absolute idea, it's absurd. It's totally absurd. Because it talks about you own yourself. Like, did you buy yourself from a market? Did you buy yourself from somewhere?
Yeah.
Logically speaking, you don't even own yourself, right? Did you decide when to come into existence in this world? Are you going to decide when you expire? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So you don't even, logically speaking, individual is an absurd idea. You don't even own yourself. Yeah. And as you mentioned, people want to live in this bubble. They don't want to think about death. Actually, there's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? There'll be a time where the reason the situation we're in right now is because our love of dunya and hatred of death, hatred of the akhirah. I think that's what it is. It's a kind of manifestation of that. And it's very interesting. Like, people, if you ask many of these people, they say they do believe in God or a creator. And this is what the colonialists wanted. Like, for example, Lord Cromer, right? Lord Cromer, who was one of the British colonialists. I think he was administrating Egypt at the time. He said that many Muslims they'll have a common fate of deism among them. Deism means just belief in God, but without revelation. And I'm quoting him. He said that where Muslims will cast aside much of the teachings of Muhammad, peace be upon him. This is what exactly is happening, and they saw this. So what's happened is, they're happy with my personal belief in God, but they've thrown away basically the way of the Prophet, the Sunnah, because that will interfere in the way they want to live or how they view society. Do you think that's a fair assessment? That's what's happening?
Yeah, I think, again, as you mentioned, this basically this status quo, which we're seeing right now, we need to realize there's something fundamentally wrong. Muslims we have our heroes, our examples. Start with the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. And one thing we notice is that they basically sacrificed their time, their effort for this deen, for this religion. And we see that they gave up everything for their purpose in life. And really, as you said, death does put into context basically your life. And really, I think the ummah needs to really review these ideas that it sort of has permeated through generations or through time, and really review. And when it comes to things happening in the U.S., imams who have certain positions, we read hundreds of Amazon reviews before buying what's it called? Like a table,
a computer desk,
right? Yeah, computer desk or something. But we're very quick to accept ideas. This person said it. As you said, are we accepting these ideas because it fits with my desire, right? Actually, this verse in the Qur'an, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, have you seen the one who's taken his God as his desires? And the tafsir says that this shows how people will do things that their desires will guide them, their action. So it says in tafsir that a man would basically worship an idol, and then he would see another idol better than his current idol, and then he'd throw this idol on the side, and then he would go and take the new idol, right? And then he basically, so-called God, he's throwing this away, and he's grabbing a new idol. And then Allah says, this person's God is actually his desires. He changes his idols as he pleases. So we have to ask ourselves, Muslim community, as Muslims, have we made the Islam we want, the one that fits our desires, what I like to hear, right? And what's my preference? And if this is our attitude, then really, unfortunately in today's time, you can choose and make up your own, choose a very specific Islam you like. But then that question our submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are we slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Does he own us, as you said? Does he own us? Does he gave us life and he's going to take our life away? Is he in charge or am I in charge? So these are the fundamental questions that needs to be asked. And when it comes to and that goes for anybody, from the people in leadership or to the brother on the street. These are the questions that needs to be asked, and we need to think about.
Jazakallah khair for that, Brother Khalid. I just want to end, before we end this, this is another thing me and Ali have talked about as well, with some other brothers as well. Muslims need to empower themselves, right? Because we have people who we see that they're men of knowledge, but it doesn't fit with what ought to be. But at the same time, you have Muslims who are very secularized and colonized in their mind, and hence their attempt at decolonizing minds in the show. So my question for you, all the panelists, is we've noticed, and you probably can agree to that, is that when we are in the process of decolonizing ourselves, and we kind of realizing the truth, and we want to share that, right? We found that when sharing it with, say, doing da'wah to Muslims, especially to extended relatives or extended family, it becomes a tricky thing. Are there any tips you can kind of share with us on how we can go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet, "Anzir ashiratakal aqrabin." Warn your close family and friends. Aqrabin in Arabic means your people who are related to you by blood. And basically, I think we need to realize that our words have impact. A lot of times, I record my khutbahs. Alhamdulillah, that's something I did, and I share it with my network of friends and people. And a lot of times you'll find it's a few months later, people will say, you know what, I came across, I listened to that lecture, you know, it was very good, it helped me. And the interesting thing is a lot of people, you know, there's a general distrust. You know, our fathers, our father's generation, everybody might be a crook. You know, this guy, he's after something. That's why he's saying this. You know, some of the uncles and fathers, they're doubtful about everybody. Oh, that imam, he's saying this because he wants this or this or that. So a lot of times when it comes from you, they have no reason to doubt you. So when you give them the same message, they know you, they trust you, and then they'll be much more susceptible to listening to it. So, you know, in terms of, you know, making sure we're not just sitting back, but rather being active, conveying the correct ideas, talking to people, breaking down ideas, what they are, where they came from, and going forward in that manner. It's going to take private meetings. It's going to take public meetings. Nuh alayhi salam said, "Inni da'atu qawmi laylan wa nahara." I call my people night and day. Wa alantu lahum. I talk to them publicly. Wa asrartu lahum, and I talk to them secretly. So, and he spoke to them in all different scenarios. So we need to make sure, you know, we're putting ourselves out there to carry this message. To meet people, to discuss ideas, go to intellectual forums and addressing these concepts. Mm-hmm. We need to realize that, you know, now is the time. The world is looking. I mean, the world is looking for a new idea, and we see, you know, the realities of capitalism. We see how the world's direction is a wrong direction.
And basically, capitalism is an extension of individualism, right? Yes. And liberalism, you could say it's a political manifestation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We see the harm the world is in. We look at the world today, we see the direction it's in. Everybody will agree with you. It's in the wrong direction. So as Muslims, we have this message. We have the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. And we're in a time today where, you know, Islam, again, has the solutions. You know, has the way forward. So this should be our effort to discuss for every single issue. Bidnillah.
Jazakallah khair, Khalid. Anything you like to?
No, that was great. Yeah.
Well, Jazakallah khair, brothers. This has been. I think we'll have. I mean, issues concerning or plaguing the Ummah is a big topic. Yeah. And obviously, we're going to have more conversations here. Yeah. On that. So, Jazakallah khair for everyone for tuning. Assalamu alaikum.